Hello and welcome to another Josh Plays 40k painting tutorial. Today I will be painting a Tyranid Hormagaunt as Hive Fleet Kraken. Now obviously I have been doing a lot of Hive Fleet Leviathan painting tutorials, but I thought I'd do this sort of special little series of Hormagaunts in different colour schemes. So to start us off, we will be doing Kraken, which is a predominantly sort of red and bony colour. And I'm going to show you quite a simple but effective method of painting them to get them up and ready on the table as soon as possible. But obviously you can tweak it if you need to for fitting in with your own colour schemes. But otherwise, follow along and we'll get going. So the first thing I've done here is undercoated the model with Wraithbone spray. Just gives you a nice sort of undercoat to work from. And then the first colour we're going to start off with is Flesh Tearers Red to block in a lot of that red sort of carapace and claws colour. So obviously again, just looking at the model, you want to pick out any of the areas that you want to be red. So these sort of carapace here on the back, obviously the horns on the top of the model, and then obviously any claws and the talons on the front as well. So obviously do take your time when going over the sort of spined area on the back here, and obviously any other areas. But if you do make any mistakes, you can neaten up with Wraithbone before moving on to the next colour. Once you're happy with that red on the carapace and claws, we're going to move on to shading the skin of the miniature. And for this we're going to be using a mix of Skeleton Horde and Contrast Medium. A rough sort of 3 parts medium to 1 part Skeleton Horde in a sort of smaller dose depending on how many models you're doing at a time. You may just need to adjust it slightly depending on how much, but they were sort of small brushfuls that I was using. But if you work your way around the model, sort of picking out all of the skin area, you don't need it to sort of sit too heavily on the flat parts. Really, just sort of looking to get the sort of deeper recesses, and also sort of stain the skin itself to give you that nice sort of browning colour that you usually find. Obviously, you don't have to worry too much about it getting onto the red. It's light enough that it won't really stand out once it's dried. Once you've got that first coat of Skeleton Horde on, we're just going to go back to Skeleton Horde, but straight from the pot this time. And this is just to go over the mouth and teeth areas. Now again, these models can have different sort of facial features. Some have open mouths with a tongue hanging out, but they all have teeth. So just carefully go over the top of those, and that will just darken them out in comparison to the rest of the skin. Once you've got that skin all dry, we're going to move on to filling in some of these sort of vent areas on the model here, of which there are quite a few. There's one on the legs, there's going to be a couple on the arms, and a few as you go around the model on the other side as well. And obviously any sort of gaps in the skin here, like there is at the front with this claw, obviously in the joints of the hoof of the back, and obviously in the knee joint there. So for this we're going to use a mix of Volupus Pink and Contrast Medium. And this is roughly again a sort of 3-to-1 mix. It keeps the nice sort of strong colour of the Volupus Pink without it being quite so dark and intimidating. We don't really want to take too much attention away from the red or the skin, but we do just want them to stand out just a little bit. So have a little bit on your brush. This will take quite a lot of concentration and practice to make sure you don't go over the edges too much. But if you have a nice sort of thin tip to your brush and not too much paint on there, you can just sort of run it into the recess, and it will obviously then dry quite clear. Obviously try not to make too many mistakes if you can, but if you do, then you can always neaten up and sort of highlight around it, because particularly when we move on to the highlight, you will be able to cover it up. Once you're happy with those dark pink inlays, we are going to move on to highlighting the skin. For this we're going to do a couple of different colours. First of all, we're going to use Ushabti Bone, just to sort of pick out some higher edges of the model. You might not notice this is too distinct in terms of the actual colour that we're putting on in comparison to the shade. But the sort of intention here is to sort of pick out any edges that we're then going to highlight a little bit better with Screaming Skull, which will stand out a little bit more. So just work your way around, take your time. When it comes to the tail, you can obviously, if you don't want the sort of sometimes blotchy effect that comes with doing a shade of any kind, you can obviously just sort of coat over the top of that. Colour wise will be very, very similar. Once you're happy with that ushabity bone, we're then going to move on to the second skin highlight of Screaming Skull. And for this is really just sort of for the sharpest edges of the model that you want to sort of stand out a little bit more. So carefully work your way around and just pick those out. Also, when it comes to using the Screaming Skull, this is a good opportunity to highlight the teeth. So again, you want a nice fine point to your brush and just gently go over the tops of the teeth, and that will just start to pick them out and leave the sort of darker skeleton horde in the recess behind. Once you're happy with how that skin is looking, we're going to move on to highlighting the red of the model now. And for this, we're going to start off with Evil Sun Scarlet. And we're going to be using this in a couple of different ways. So first of all, just looking at the claws, for instance, sort of picking out the sharpest edges and sort of running your brush along them. But then also when you come to the sort of back armor plating and carapace and also the head crest as well, we're going to be looking at doing a sort of feathering technique, similar to how I've done with my Leviathan models before, but just have a nice sort of point to your brush and do sort of nice short concise lines into the armor, and then you can pull that back. You don't want to go sort of midway around, but take your time, work your way around the model, and then we can move on to the second highlight. Once you've finished with that first highlight, we're going to move on to the second highlight of Wild Rider Red. And same sort of principle applies here with regards to the highlighting of the model. So for the claws and the talons at the front, we're going to be looking at just doing the sharpest edges of the model. So sort of bringing your brush down and picking those out. And the same sort of applies with the carapace as well, with the feathering technique. So again, sort of short, sharp lines, but again, sort of focusing a little bit more towards the base of each of those panels rather than going so far up the carapace. Once you're finished with that second highlight of Wild Rider Red, we're going to finish things off with Troll Slayer Orange on the red here, and this is just simply for the finest of points on the model as you go round. So again, sort of the ridge marks here in the middle, just sort of pick out parts of those and run your brush down just where the light would be heavily catching as you look at the top of the model. Once you've finished off all that red, we're going to finish off the model entirely with just picking out those eye details, and for that we're going to use iodine yellow. You can also use a green if you want to, that would also look quite contrasting to the rest of the paint scheme here. But for this I'm going with a sort of yellow tinge, and you don't need a lot on your brush, just a little bit, and just literally run the paint into the socket of the eye and then just gently around the base of that as well. And there we have a finished Hormagaunt in Hive Fleet Kraken colours. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you have any questions at all, just leave them below in the comments, but otherwise I will see you in the next one. Thank you, bye bye.